Dawn breaks over the jagged highlands of northern Ethiopia. A cold wind moves through the dry grasses. Mist clings to the mountain ridges. And across the rolling hills near the town of Adwa, tens of thousands of men wait in silence. Farmers, priests, warriors, armed with rifles, spears, and unshakable resolve. It is March 1st, 1896. Across the valley, the army of a European empire prepares to advance. They carry modern artillery. They carry the arrogance of conquest. They carry the certainty that Africa will fall, as it has fallen everywhere else. But on this morning, history will fracture. For here, in the shadow of the Ethiopian mountains, an African kingdom will do what no other African nation has done in the age of imperial expansion. It will defeat a European power in open battle. This is the story of the Battle of Adwa, Africa's unbreakable victory. By the late 19th century, Africa was being carved apart. At the Berlin Conference of 1884–85, European powers gathered in Germany with maps and rulers. No African representatives were invited. Borders were drawn not by culture or consent, but by imperial ambition. Britain claimed vast territories from Cairo to Cape Town. France spread across West Africa. Belgium seized the Congo with ruthless brutality. Germany staked its claim in East and Southwest Africa. And Italy, newly unified and eager for imperial prestige, looked toward the Horn of Africa. Italy had arrived late to the colonial race. Its unification in 1861 had forged a nation, but not yet an empire. National pride demanded expansion. African conquest promised glory. Italy established footholds along the Red Sea coast, forming the colony of Eritrea. From there, its leaders cast their eyes southward, toward the ancient empire of Ethiopia. But Ethiopia was no ordinary African territory. Long before European colonialism, Ethiopia had been a sovereign civilization. The legacy of the Aksum still echoed through its highlands. Christianity had taken root here in the 4th century, making Ethiopia one of the world's oldest Christian nations. Its emperors claimed descent from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Its monasteries guarded ancient manuscripts. Its people, diverse in language and culture, were united under a monarch who bore the title Negusa Nagast, King of Kings. In the late 19th century, that monarch was a man of formidable intellect and ambition. Menelik II. Menelik was not a relic of the past. He was a strategist, a modernizer, a diplomat who understood the shifting balance of global power. He purchased modern rifles from European suppliers. He studied international politics. He unified rival regions under imperial authority. He knew the storm was coming. In 1889, Italy signed the Treaty of Wuchale with Menelik. The treaty, written in both Amharic and Italian, appeared to establish peace and cooperation. But there was a fatal difference between the two versions. In the Italian text, a clause stated that Ethiopia was required to conduct foreign affairs through Italy, effectively making it an Italian protectorate. In the Amharic version, the wording suggested that Ethiopia could use Italy's diplomatic assistance if it chose to. One word: mandatory or optional. Italy announced to the world that Ethiopia was now under its protection. Menelik was outraged. He rejected the treaty, denounced Italy's claim, and began mobilizing his empire. Italy, convinced of its military superiority, chose war. Menelik issued a call to arms across the empire. From Tigray in the north to Shoa in the center, from Oromo territories to Amhara strongholds, regional rulers gathered their forces. Among them was Empress Taytu. Taytu was no ceremonial figure. She was politically astute, fiercely patriotic, and resolute in her opposition to Italy. She urged resistance when others counseled caution. She mobilized her own troops and personally accompanied the campaign. By early 1896, an extraordinary force had assembled. Estimates vary, but between 70,000 and 100,000 Ethiopian fighters marched north. They carried French Lebel rifles, Russian arms, captured weapons, and traditional spears and shields. They carried faith. They carried unity. And they carried the knowledge that defeat would mean subjugation. Facing them was an Italian force of roughly 17,000 troops under General Oreste Baratieri. Many were Italian regulars. Others were Eritrean askari, African soldiers serving under Italian command. Italy believed Ethiopia would crumble. But supply lines were stretched thin. The terrain was treacherous. Intelligence was flawed. And political pressure from Rome pushed Baratieri toward a reckless offensive. On the night of February 29, 1896, Italian brigades began a confused march toward Ethiopian positions near Adwa. The plan depended on precise coordination. But in the darkness of the mountains, units lost contact. Columns separated. Maps proved unreliable. By dawn, the Italian army was dangerously divided. Menelik's scouts saw everything. March 1, 1896. The sun rises. Ethiopian forces, positioned across the heights, descend upon the scattered Italian brigades. The thunder of artillery echoes through the valleys. Ras Alula, Ras Makoan, father of the future Emperor Haile Selassie, lead charges across the rugged terrain. From the hills, Empress Taytu's forces cut off access to water sources, tightening the trap. What follows is not chaos, it is coordination. Wave after wave of Ethiopian fighters press forward. Italian lines hold briefly, then fracture. Eritrean Askari fight bravely, but are overwhelmed. By midday, the battlefield is a storm of smoke, dust, and steel. Italian formations collapse under sheer numerical force and strategic encirclement. Thousands are killed, thousands captured. General Baratieri retreats in humiliation. By the end of the day, nearly 7,000 Italian soldiers lie dead. It is one of the most decisive defeats ever suffered by a European army in colonial Africa. Eyewitnesses described the hills covered in men as far as the eye could see. An Italian survivor later wrote of the endless tide of Ethiopian warriors descending from the mountains. In reconstructed dialogue, one can imagine Menelik surveying the battlefield and saying quietly, "Today, Ethiopia stands." For the Ethiopian fighters, many of whom were farmers weeks before, the victory was not just military. It was existential. They had defended their sovereignty. They had preserved their civilization. Adwa was not a miracle. It was preparation. Menelik had modernized his army. He exploited European rivalries to purchase weapons. He united regional powers under a common cause. Italian leadership, by contrast, underestimated Ethiopia. They misread the terrain. They allowed politics to dictate strategy. And perhaps most importantly, Ethiopia fought for survival. Italy fought for prestige. In October 1896, Italy signed the Treaty of Addis Ababa. It recognized Ethiopia as a fully independent sovereign state. Across Africa and across the African diaspora, the news resonated like thunder. At a time when nearly the entire continent was under colonial rule, Ethiopia stood free. Adwa became a symbol, a proof, an inspiration. The defeat stunned Europe. In Italy, riots erupted. The government fell. Across colonized Africa, hope flickered. In the Caribbean and the United States, intellectuals and activists looked to Ethiopia as a beacon of black sovereignty. Decades later, figures of Pan-Africanism would invoke Adwa as evidence that European domination was neither natural nor inevitable. Ethiopia's victory did not end colonialism. For decades later, under Benito Mussolini, Italy would invade again in 1935, seeking revenge. This time, with chemical weapons and modern aircraft, Ethiopia would fall temporarily. But even then, the memory of Adwa endured. And in 1941, Ethiopia's sovereignty was restored. Adwa had already etched its lesson into history. African resistance was possible and powerful. Today, the Battle of Adwa remains more than a military engagement. It is a symbol of dignity. It reshaped diplomatic relations between Europe and Africa. It preserved Ethiopia's independence during the height of imperial conquest. It inspired liberation movements in the 20th century. It demonstrated that technology alone does not determine destiny. Unity matters. Leadership matters. Will matters. As the camera rises over the Ethiopian highlands, the mountains stand as they did in 1896, silent witnesses to history. The wind still moves across Adwa. And beneath that soil lies a moment when the course of empire was interrupted, when Africa did not yield, when Ethiopia, ancient and unbroken, stood against the tide and won. The Battle of Adwa was not merely Ethiopia's triumph. It was a declaration heard across a colonized continent. Africa was not conquered in spirit. And on that March morning in 1896, in the highlands of Ethiopia, the impossible became reality.